And so all you have left then is basically money, right?
Mm.
And if that is like, is that all what's where we're about? Is
Mm.
just like make more money and then buy some more stuff and
Mm.
go on fancier
Because that's a
holidays?
pretty empty existence, isn't it?
Yeah,
In some ways.
it's
Yeah.
a brutally empty
Yeah.
existence. One of the things he likes to talk about is the fact that the current traditional education system was formed in Victorian times, and with a lot more emphasis on obedience, and conforming to norms, and it's to some extent training kids to get ready for a factory life. I sat for 4 days transfixed on the edge of my seat, just listening to all this amazing content being beamed into my head, and coming back after the dinner and after the drinks, at 11:30 at night with more energized than when I left in the morning. And yeah, and it was a life-changing experience, as it has been for many people. And I came back to the North End and said, I know what we're going to do.
Hello again. Welcome to another edition of Northern Spotlights with me, Terry McStay. It's good of you to join us. And today I'm delighted to welcome Herb Kim of Thinking Digital.
Right. Hi everyone. My name is Herb Kim. I'm the founder of the Thinking Digital Conference and TEDx Newcastle.
So we're filming this in December 23, and it's fair to say you've had a busy couple of months, Herb. Is that right? So we've just had the TEDx, which I was at, and was fantastic. And then prior to that, you had an event in Durham.
That's right.
That's right,
Yeah. So So November is a very busy month for us. The beginning of the month is a newer event called the Bright Ideas Gathering. This was the third edition. It started basically in the tail end of the pandemic in November 2021, and has had a very happy run of 3 years so far. And we're signed up for another 2 years of it happening again in that same sort of November, late October sort of time frame. And it is it's another what we call thought leadership conference, sort of a blend between, say, a TEDx event and Thinking Digital, where we get a wide array of different speakers covering different topics, and a very similar sort of buzz. I think the main difference is that because it's largely supported by Durham County Council, it gives us a lot more freedom actually in terms of the audience. So the speakers are very similar, but we can be a lot more aggressive in terms of getting sixth formers, secondary school kids, university students. And what's great about that is that because they're effectively professional students, at that age, that is their job, is to be students, right? That when they get hit with this very different form of, I guess you would call education, it just lights the brain up. And at that age, of course, they're very unguarded in their enthusiasm. Once they get turned on, a lot of them do come in sort of like, ooh. But and what's great is that for the normal audience, it's just very exciting to suddenly see like these younger people being just so into the event, if you will.
Yeah.
So
and probably wishing that they'd had that experience. I certainly would. If I could have gone to a TEDx or the Bright Ideas thing when I was whatever 12, 14, 16, it would have blown my mind and would have just opened so many opportunities up. And it's great that they have that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm one of the first winner of the $1 million TED Prize was Sugata Mitra from formerly at Newcastle University.
Really?
And his whole thing is, I mean, he's a great researcher of how people learn, right? And one of the things he likes to talk about is the fact that the current traditional education system was formed in Victorian times, when in effect it was effectively a large babysitting service to allow the parents to be able to go to work, and with a lot more emphasis on obedience, and conforming to norms, and it's to some extent training kids to get ready for a factory life, right? Where not questioning things, listening to the
Doing as they're
manager,
told, yeah.
behaving, yeah, showing up on time, all that sort of jazz, right? That was what they cared about, really, you know, and totally not fit for purpose in a world that's demanding creativity, you know, self motivation, self direction, all, you know, basically being a human being that can actually direct their own life and understands, you know, what are my strengths, what am I, you know, what am I passionate about, what am I weak, what are my weaknesses, and to just be really honest about it versus trying to pretend, you know, try to mold yourself into whatever mold you think is appropriate to get a job or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so it's not a surprise that, you know, without naming names, I mean, my daughter just graduated from supposedly one of the best, you know, schools as per Ofsted ratings and things like that, a grammar school. And, you know, I'm not saying it was bad. She was certainly very safe, and they certainly were a well-meaning group of people. But, you know, for someone that is, you know, for people who are naturally oriented towards regimentation, towards, you know, sort of very, how should I say, very just self-disciplined, and very happy to sort of play along with the rules, or, you know, very sport. You know, the sort of the traditional things that one gets ahead in school with. But anyone that might be described as creative or nerdy, still very much, you know, square peg in a round hole type situation. You know? And I think that was true for her. And, you know, who knows? I mean, there's a lot of hope that AI is finally going to kind of break the stranglehold on traditional education with these alternative methods of delivery. But, you know, we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of directions that AI could
Yeah,
take
I
us
mean,
on.
yeah, that's
who knows. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think the great thing about these kinds of formats is that, I mean, so what I tell people now is that, I mean, for me, I think what it's about is the format and the conferences we do and the work that we do with the speakers in turn really helping them shape their talks into being much more about storytelling versus a presentation of facts, right? We also help them with regard to building a rapport with your audience, right? I mean, a lot of people just expect because they're professor of this or CEO of that they're just going to have people just be blown away by their amazingness and just be ready to absorb their wisdom and just walk away transformed. But of course, as you know, it's a hell of a lot harder than that. And yeah, but I think, you know, for me, I think what it is, I mean, the natural, you know, there's things like, you know, humans have a bias towards a sensitivity towards risk and things going wrong. And as such, one's life is naturally full of thinking about problems. What are the stressors or anxieties or things that could go wrong, or worries about your business partner or your romantic partner and thinking, oh, you know, what are they really thinking? And you know, all this whole massive collection of, or insecurities about not spending enough time with your kids or whatever it might be, right? And that's entirely appropriate, and you know, a lot of success happens because you do pay attention to those details. You do, you know, you do make sure that risks that could be out there aren't being realized or aren't potentially going to spring up on you. But, you know, a life spent entirely focused on problems all the time, which is easy to do, right? Is just not worth living, frankly, right? And particularly if you are creative or innovative or whatever, you have to have some time where you're actually thinking about possibilities and potential, right? So how could we do things better, differently, you know, or redoing things so they actually fit the values that you have about life, right? So do you want to be working 80 hours a week? Maybe, maybe not, you know. Do you really, you know, so, and I think, you know, I think the format helps that, you know, where it help shift your brain into this different mindset. And I think for me, I mean, I'm sure you'll come across the phrase a learning mindset or a growth mindset, which is a lovely sounding thing, right? Right at the face of it. I think anyone wants to think, oh yeah, I want to be in a growth mindset, or I have a growth mindset, right? And if you've read the research and things like that, you'll know that, you know, the evidence seems to indicate that people in this mindset, these are the entrepreneurs, the innovators, people willing to take risks and so on and so forth. But then how do you actually get there, right? I mean, how do you even know you're in it? right? I mean, other than like looking back on your life and say, oh, I had this growth mindset, and hence that's twice. And I actually do genuinely think that that's what this format does. It actually does, and for which is why I think people, I mean, I've been in the Northeast since 2002. So what's that, 21 years or so? And coming here, especially given all the kind of, let's face it, mixed reputation that I had in terms of coming as an outsider in, like the idea that I'd be able to convince 1,000+ juries to sit in a dark auditorium to listen to, frankly, a bunch of relatively random people, many of whom you've never heard of before, right? And then get something from that experience and return year after year and things like that. It suggests there's something going on there so that's right now, that's kind of where I think we're at, is that being reconnected to that sense of potential and possibility is just a very exciting place to be, even if it's only for an afternoon. And I think it endures. I mean, I think this is the difference between, say, I don't know, going to a football game and getting drunk with your friends, which is a great time, and it will take your mind off your problems and things like that for a while. But naturally, as soon as the buzz wears off, as soon as you're back home, those things tend to come flooding back in. Or holiday. I mean, it's another way. It's like, people will go, I don't know, to Thailand or wherever, and go, oh my God, there's like 10 days of paradise, amazing, and all these great things.
Only while you're there doing that thing.
Exactly. Yeah, and I feel like this is a vacation for the mind that actually endures. That it does actually kind of, and then actually 6 months later you can kind of reconnect back with that sort of thing. And so, anyways, I mean, I'm kind of bragging, but I'm just trying to explain, I think, like what the effect is like.
Yeah, so I think there's definitely a kind of a hunger for that sort of way of thinking and that input that people need.
Yeah, I mean, I think who knows why we're in a period of time where this sort of stuff, this sort of content, these kinds of talks, this kind of experience is filling a gap, if you will, or hitting, a button. But I mean, I think we live in a time where, I mean, why are it's like, I think before there used to be a sense of joint purpose, right? And then having an idea, an identity of being an American or British or whatever meant something, that you were part of this group that's moving forward. But I think maybe it's because we're in this, some people call late stage capitalism, where it really is very much like the sense that every person for themselves, right? And so don't look to us as leaders for any kind of direction, right? We're exclusive. We're all just grabbing for whatever we can get, and so I do genuinely think about, like, and we don't have, religion isn't really a force anymore. I mean, of course, there are obviously many, many religious people still, but in terms of it being a force in public life, it certainly seems to have receded significantly. In some places, it's obviously more or less non-existent. And so all you have left then is basically money, right? And if that is like, is that all we're about? Is just like make more money and then buy some more stuff and go on fancier holidays?
It's a pretty empty existence, isn't it? In some ways.
It's a brutally empty existence. And what does it mean to be, why do we have nations anymore? Right? I mean, like, what is the purpose of it, right? I mean, I have some answers, but at the moment, none of our leaders our so-called leaders seem to be coming up with it. And I do think that, I think, if I mean, really going into this, like, if you think about the current state of politics and the fact that you have people like Trump, Farage, Boris Johnson, formerly, that, and I listened recently to Rory Stewart talk about just his utter disgust about someone like Boris Johnson, and that he was able to get so far in his life. And in some ways, I can totally understand him. He is more or less a documented liar, right? A serial liar, and done lots of, and this is not the point, though, is that I think that people are so going another step back. If you think, I think one of the things I argue is that we live in a world where we have a global leadership crisis. There's a real vacuum of real leadership. There are people who call leader, but they aren't actually doing their job, right? What we really have is a bunch of managers running around controlling the place. And the thing about to me, what's the difference between a leader and a manager, right? So the typical managerial mindset is about control, right? They want to control stuff, right? They want to measure, they want to know what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, and how are you going to do it, right? And if they could, they would be sticking, you know, cameras and drones and following you around, and that's you know, and there's a place for that, but balanced against that is you have to have some sort of vision about where you are headed, whether that's as a nation, as a company, as an organization, as a family, as a, you know what I mean, and that's really where the leader comes in, and so what does then the leader do? So the leader, to me, is responsible for the vision, the story, the narrative, whatever you want to call it, about what this group is all about.
Yeah.
You know, why do we exist?
Why do we do this? Yeah.
You know, and where are we today, and where are we headed? And of course, they can't just yell at you and say this is the vision. It has to be compelling.
Yeah.
You know, it's the difference if the leader, sorry, if the manager is about pushing you to get onto the bus, and the leader is about compelling you. You don't need people giving you incentives and bonuses and whatnot. You just like, wow, I got to get onto this bus.
This guy. Yeah.
And let's go on this crazy adventure wherever it is we're going to, sort of thing. And we don't have any of that, you know. And I think it's part of the reason that tech startups have become such a big deal. I mean, think about like, why are startups now such a big deal, right? And I actually think, if you think about a startup, typically a real startup, it basically has no money or very little money. It has typically no to few customers. It has no to few employees, right? So how do you get from that to, let's say, Google or Facebook or whatever, right?
In a relatively short space of time.
Exactly, yes, and that's a really great point. And I would argue it's because in nearly all the cases, it's because they have leadership, and the leadership knows about how to create and communicate a compelling vision about where we're going, and that you're going to want to join us. Not even about making billions of dollars or millions of dollars, but just simply because this is going to be an exciting journey.
Yeah, and everyone knows who those leaders are, don't they? The Mark Zuckerbergs and the Elon Musks and the Bill Gateses and people like that. They're very visible.
Sorry, not to interrupt. The guy who created Slack, Stuart Butterfield, which I think eventually sold for $40 billion or something like that to Oracle. I mean, when he talked about, you know, you'll no doubt see these things when they talk to successful people and say, "Oh, what would you have done differently?" And it was fascinating because the thing he said, I would have spent a lot more time crafting the story, you know, to make it. You know, if you think about something like Slack, how do you explain that before there is Slack, right? You know, other than messaging, you know, but well, we have messages, so why do we need it in this form, sort of thing. And so, you know, that to me was a kind of confirmation. And I just think, you know, it's like, I mean, I'll take myself as a great example. I mean, you know, I'm a Princeton undergrad. I got my MBA from Wharton, you know, one of the most prestigious business schools out there, right? Ostensibly two of the greatest leadership academies in the world, right? And I can say from personal experience, you don't learn a goddamn thing about leading anybody, right? It's all about management, quantification, analysis, critical thinking, you know, written communication, you know, all the sort of the basic tools of how to manage a thing. And that's frankly what most of those people want, is they want to be given responsibility for 1,000 people, you know, whatever, some sort of thing, which then, and it's all, the flow all comes to them, right? So the people now report to them, right? And there's very little of them pulling people up, right? Because they don't have those skills, you know, you don't learn those skills, which is why I think you're seeing a lot of new leaders come from very unconventional backgrounds, like Trump, like, you know, as a great example of someone that knows, for better for worse, the natural tools of what gets people. I mean, he's got a practical cult now, as I'm sure you've read. I mean, you know, or seen. And so I think, you know, TED is all about how do you convert formerly boring things about experimental physics or about psychology or about neuroscience or whatever, and actually make them genuinely compelling, that even
that
you
anyone
know,
can
a 12-year-old can get now excited about you know, these sorts of topics. And so I think that may be where, you know, and one of the things to me about, you know, so again, as an example, you know, if you look, so I've been a long time Hillary Clinton supporter. I donated to both of her campaigns, her presidential campaigns, the only campaigns I've ever donated to the federal maximum. And, you know, like, my mother's been a long time Republican, like a lifelong Republican, and so we've always just stayed away from talking about stuff. But that summer of 2016, she asked me very politely and was wanting to have a constructive discussion about, you know, so why should one vote for Hillary Clinton, right? And I immediately launched into all the anti-Trump stuff about, you know, racist, sexist, blah blah blah, all that sort of jazz. And she said, listen, this isn't about Trump. I accept that he's doesn't seem like a very good person, right? But this is more about why should I or anyone else vote for Hillary Clinton? Like, what is she going to do?
Yeah.
I just remember just totally stumped and an increasingly red-faced. I couldn't think of a single thing that she was going to do.
Yeah.
Right. And the same thing was true about the Brexit campaign. You know.
Yeah, I think there was a very compelling argument on one side. And
Take back control.
Yeah.
350 million a week to the NHS. You know. Some very can anyone remember anything about the Remain campaign?
No.
Not a single thing. What you can remember is Project Fear, which was the brand, of course, their enemies gave
it's just fed into
to them, right? And the same thing with Trump. You know, we're going to build a wall. We're going to make America great again. We're putting America first. 3 very short, one-sentence stories about where we're going, right? And I personally believe that people are desperate for narratives and stories about where we are headed or why we are headed, why we should be headed someplace, you know?
And almost regardless of what that story is, just it's a story I recognize, I'm getting on board with it.
350 million a week to the NHS. How many people really believe that was going to happen, right? But it gave them something. They gave them something about, and then also, frankly, as well, the other thing as well is like when you're in the pub and someone says, "Oh my God, you're going to vote for Trump, or you're going to vote for Brexit?" You got some lines. You just roll them out. I mean, that's where I first heard "take back control" from 2 people that I had previously considered to be sane, saying rather rational thinkers, and they just kept parroting it. They were reinforcing each other. Take back control. We're going to take 300. All this sort of stuff, and it just gives people that little bit of shield that they need, and it keeps them and because for most people who aren't leaders, they don't want to be humiliated. I mean, it's part of it. I mean, we had a really interesting talk about a guy who is literally a high performance expert. He's written multiple books on it, and at the end of the day, the reason that leaders are leaders are people like, and not traditional political people like Michael Jordan, let's say. The thing about sets Michael Jordan apart, he doesn't seem to care what other people think. So he's willing to do things and be the first, stick his neck out. Yeah. People start making fun of him. Not when he's a superstar, but when he was 12 years old, right? And and trying to do things different. And that is, and so if you can give, you talk about if you are in an organization, one thing you want from your leaders is air cover, right? And so having these sorts of narratives is actually, in a sense, air cover for you. So if you do get called up for something, you got something to say other than, So anyways, sorry. So I think that's part of, the whole TED thing and Thinking Digital and the Bright Ideas stuff is really just, working with, with people who are obviously very bright and accomplished. And what's great is increasingly we used to look for people that were already accomplished, polished speakers.
Right.
And now we can increasingly take people who don't necessarily have a lot of track record as a keynote speaker and help them get up that learning curve quite quickly, which of course they're grateful for. And once they realize they can connect.
And I suspect in some cases that doesn't take a great deal because they've already got the knowledge, the passion, and the willingness and desire to share it. And it's almost just polishing that, isn't it?
And it's painful. I mean, we've all suffered from trying to communicate something or convince something that seems just blimmin' obvious. And yet it's just bouncing off their heads for some reason or another. And, typically you get mad at them, start calling them idiot or other names like that. But, you have to accept responsibility that maybe it's you that's not doing, the good enough job. And a lot of it is because we've been trained to think that 2 + 2 = 4. So if you can have a 2 + 2 = 4 type of argument, and it seems obvious to you, then that should be enough. But as you know, it's not enough. You know, people need to. I mean, there's a whole science about, as you know, about persuasion and about how you can get someone from whatever position that you feel is wrong, and to at least open their minds to consider what you're talking about. And it's primarily emotive, and that's the big thing people. And I think this is where the left, I think, because they because I think they are so convinced of their moral superiority because they can prove it on a piece of paper that this is the better policy or the whatever, that's enough, right? And the right tends to be a lot craftier and realizing, nope, it's not just about 2 + 2 = 4. There's a lot more to it than that, which is why I think, at least at the current moment, a lot of the populism you see weirdly is coming from the right. It used to be a very left thing to be populist, but not so much these days.
Yeah. I think maybe they're just better at it at the moment.
Sorry?
Maybe they're just better at it at the moment, better at crafting those compelling stories.
Yeah, I mean, they're. I mean, well, I mean, you know, ultimately, oftentimes that side of the fence is got a lot more successful, wealthy people backing them, and successful, wealthy people oftentimes got there because they knew how to communicate to an audience and get them to invest, buy whatever it is that they were wanting to do, and then just transposing those skills to a political agenda.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, like all of our guests, Herbie very kindly sent us a few photographs of your earlier days, just so we can see where you've come from. So this first one here is you at school. So where was that?
So it was a school called Merritt Memorial School, and it was a primary school in a place called Cresskill, New Jersey. It was in Bergen County, basically northeast New Jersey.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because the thing I love about this photograph. So what year would that have been? It's on there. But
this would have been, I think, like 3rd or 4th grade or something like that.
Right. So the thing I love about that is that even though that's in the very exotic United States of America, or at least that's how it would have felt when I was that age, it looks like every other school photo that you've ever seen.
Yeah,
which
the
is
best
quite
part is
heartening.
the powder blue coat that I'm wearing. Well, yeah.
Because I don't know, I think British people like myself imagine that life in the States in those days was like, I don't know, happy days or something, and clearly it was just the same as or very similar to it was here.
Yeah, I think there are certain similar themes. I think that, I mean, for me, that was kind of America in the sort of like, I don't know, 70s, 80s, maybe arguably 90s. You know, it was kind of like the sort of I don't know, the good times for America. So the economy was strong, and there was just a sense of optimism and this kind of like moral sense of what it was to be an American, if you will. And and sadly, probably with maybe with the aftermath of sort of Reaganism and the sort of like reintroduction of this kind of much more sort of Ayn Randian sort of like pursuing your self-interest and above all else was a good thing and morally defensible and we had movies like Wall Street and Gordon Gekko and Greed is Good and all that sort of stuff at the beginning of the era, but that's unfortunately just carried through. And the America of today is such a different place, even though it's still obviously in terms of its economic and technological leadership, it's still very much a superpower. But if you look beyond the macros and you look beyond and look to actual real life, it's a very different story for arguably most people now. And just the sense of anxiety and tension that when I spent 5 weeks this summer, mostly on the road with my daughter looking at college campuses, and I was really just taken aback by how different it just felt, and I've been going back multiple times a year for years, and it just felt like every year. I mean, COVID obviously to some extent probably accelerated some of that. I'm not saying it's a dystopian or anything like that, but it is different, and it does feel different, generally speaking, in not great ways.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I mean, I've only been to the States a few times, but the first time was in 2005. The more recent time was in 2017, and I did notice
the difference.
Quite a difference.
Yeah, for sure.
Just it's hard to pinpoint what that difference is, but there was a definite and as you say, probably not necessarily for the better.
Sadly not. sadly not. Yeah. So, but yeah, I bet. And it was. I look back fondly upon the photo and
So what were you?
good
What were
times.
you? What you? Were you into? I don't know, skateboarding and all those kind of
I
things.
was really into bicycle motocross,
Okay.
BMX.
Right.
So we used to race regularly in organized leagues and stuff like that. And baseball was another thing that I played regularly and things like that. So yeah, those were my passions at that
Typical
time.
American
Yeah,
teen.
yeah. No, it was good times. Good times for sure.
And did you have an idea then of kind of the direction you might want to go in terms of career and things like that? No?
Zero direction as a
Like most of us.
as a Korean kid. It was just do good at school, get good grades, and yeah, it's that's the prime and only directive. They kind of almost didn't care about what your interests
Yeah.
and strengths might be. It
Just
was
get a
just
good education, get a
A's.
good career.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, which I mean that's yeah, it's not atypical for
No.
lots of kids. Particularly, I think of minority families. There's this great emphasis on grades and pursuing very conservative sort of professions. Yeah.
Yeah. And did you fulfill those dreams in terms of how
Um,
well you did?
yeah, to some extent. I mean, so as I mentioned, so I did manage to get myself into Princeton, and I did reasonably well there. And then I got my MBA from the Wharton School. But yeah, I mean, they were. I mean, I had great experiences, and things like that.
Because
But
those second photographs, they're from that time at Princeton, is that right?
that's right. Yeah, that's
Right.
right. Yeah, from my time during Princeton University, and it's a kind of Disneyland for thinking people in some ways. It's in a very safe, benign, beautiful setting, and you don't have to worry about anything practical in real life other than showing up to class and doing well. And of course, you are surrounded by a lot of other very talented, interesting, curious people, and it's a core of people I continue to stay in touch with today, as do many other university and college students. It's a you know it's a it's a sort of great feeling of sort of joint exploration and such like. So um, so yeah, no, I had a great experience.
And what was it you studied at Princeton?
I was a history major. I
Okay.
specialized in American diplomatic history in the post World War II era.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it was really interesting. I think for me, I think that there were two things that I think it gave me was um, you do a lot of writing, and so my written communication came along that in a big way, and and that's just a skill that has stuck with me, and I feel like has given me advantages to be able to communicate, in a clear, compelling way. Um, you, and and as well as all the sort of like people development things, and that's really what I would advise young people is that if you are going to do the uni route, um, of course, learn stuff, figure all that, but a lot of it is around also like don't waste the opportunity to hang out and meet lots of other really interesting people, some of whom could be lifelong friends or whatever, a lifelong partner or whatever it might be. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, you're never gonna get another time in your life where you're gonna spend 3 to 4 years with a bunch of other people that are in very similar circumstances, and then boom, and then you go off and you obviously
Yeah.
go off to whatever post uni career
Yeah.
that you
Then
did.
real life starts.
Real life begins to start, doesn't really start, but it begins to start certainly there, and we all know the sort of difficulty that some have transitioning from the university bubble to the real world.
So then you did an MBA. Um,
Yeah, I did an MBA at the Wharton School in Philadelphia. Again, I did it for, I think most people did it for very mercenary reasons. It's just hopefully gonna do this degree after 2 years and come out with a higher paying prestigious job, and that certainly that happened for me. I think for me, one of the things I genuinely find it to be intellectually a lot more interesting than I thought it would be.
okay.
Again, really interesting, great people that a number of which that I consider best friends to this day. For me, the most important thing was I entered in September 1994. And one of the first things you do is you go on a IT orientation is one of the first sort of things you do. And you get an email address, and they show you how to work the printer.
And
And
an email address then was a pretty new
it
thing.
was, yeah,
I
it was
remember
novel.
getting my email address and wow,
Yeah, it was
who can I
novel.
email? And I couldn't think of anyone,
Yeah.
anyone else who had one.
But what they showed me, almost as an afterthought, was something called an internet browser. It was Netscape Navigator 1.1, one of the earliest versions of the modern browser. And and of course, you had the advantage of not being on a dial-up modem, but you were on a fat university T3 or whatever it's called, broadband pipe. And I was just blown away, like what you could do with this thing. And after that, so
So everything changed after that.
yeah, so I went, instead of, I thought I was going to go work in FMCG, fast moving consumer goods, and I had some offers from like Johnson & Johnson and places like that. But I had this opportunity to go join the internet division, which just opened up at IBM.
Okay.
And I just, even though the money was less and, it was like, they didn't know what job I was had, but they just, but I was just like, I got to work in this internet thing. And that was my first post business school job, was at IBM. So yeah, and had a great time, great experience.
Because I remember, because I was working for ICI at the time, and the company mathematician, because we had one of those, well, we had a few actually, because I was one of the few physicists working in this big chemical organization, and there were 2 or 3 of us in a team, and we got word from the company mathematician that he'd got this thing called the internet.
The company mathematician,
Yeah,
wow,
yeah.
that's cool.
And so we all went up to his room and all huddled around the screen, and I think it was called Mosaic.
Yeah.
And it was rubbish.
Yeah.
But it was absolutely mind-blowing at the same
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And we all just looked at this thing and then looked at each other and thought, wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think like you, I mean, I didn't move into that field, but I kind of, my world did shift ever so slightly.
You had a glimpse of the future.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
Exactly. So that must have been an amazing place to work in those early days of the internet at IBM.
Yeah, it was genuinely a privilege, and to be working at a place like IBM, at the dawn of the modern internet, if you will. And but they were also fumbling around as well. I mean, IBM never became a major player in the internet, and so but it was great to be there at the time. So
yeah. And so what kind of things were you working on?
So we were working on something called World Distributor, which was meant to be a kind of e-commerce, sort of instant e-commerce solution for small to medium-sized enterprises, effectively, right? It was the earliest attempts to do something like, I guess, what today might be called like Shopify and these sorts of things, but it was early.
Well, I was going to say, because that is very early for
Oh yeah,
that.
yeah. It was like being in a skunk works, and just because very few people. I mean, to be fair, Amazon launched not much longer, not much later after that, rather.
Okay.
So and obviously that began this furtive attempt to convince people that back then people were is it safe and all this sort of stuff, and just entering your credit card into this computer and hoping nothing happened bad, right? And it took a while, obviously. Probably there was 2 things really. One was just the speeds, So back then, if you didn't work for an IBM and you didn't have an internet broadband pipe, it was still 2888, 14.4 modems.
Still painful.
slow as heck. And it was painful. So you only really wanted to use it if you really specifically needed that thing that only you could get there, right? And so obviously once broadband took off, that was big. The big thing, which is actually underheld, was really the iPhone, because then you had 2 things. One is obviously you now have a modern internet browser in every pocket, more or less, right, or in every owner's pocket. And then of course, Google quickly followed up with their phones, and there you really see an explode. And the other thing as well is, I think, especially because it's Apple, people just had an inherent trust of Apple. Like I could throw my my child's information on there, my phone, my credit cards, whatever, and Apple will keep it safe. Which, to be fair, it largely has done. And yeah, and when you look at what happens to e-commerce transactions after that, it's amazing actually, because I leading up to 2008 when they launched the iPhone, I already thought we were in what you might call a modern e-commerce, modern internet sort of era, but it's really after that, if you will, non-nerdy, non-tech friendly people relax, and especially with things like iPads as well, right? Which really did a lot of work for both interesting, like people like CEOs and C-suite type people who now had this like big fat screen. It was easy to, and also actually seniors as well. Which is a classic thing. And once you got those folks comfortable with it, then it really just you starting to reach the really the latest adopters of new technology. And now everyone's on it, and once grandma and grandpa are buying stuff on any other late holdouts,
it's going to be safe, don't you?
So so that was a really fascinating period.
So how long were you at IBM?
I was only there for like 18 months.
Oh, really?
And then because then I got recruited to move to the UK, and my girlfriend was there working for what was then Coopers and Lybrand, became PwC eventually, and so. And so I got recruited to move to Oxford to go work for Blackwell's, and I was there for 2 years, helping set up their internet bookshop. This would have been '97. I came over full time. I then moved to a German competitor of theirs called Bertelsmann, who owned like places like Random House and things like that. Again, to set up another internet bookshop for them, and then spent I spent a year at an internet startup.
Had they seen? Had they seen Amazon do the same and thought, right, we need to do
So
that?
Blackwell saw what Amazon was doing, and they just thought, well, we already have a direct mail operation, so we just need to slap an internet front end onto that and just leverage what we already got. And
was it that simple?
No, because back then, e-commerce was just a much less stable place, and frankly, we bought into a very relatively high-end software package, and the problem with that is that when you hand over your money and you make that commitment to an expensive software, that company now owns you. You don't own them. You're dependent on them for support, for updates, for bugs, and like if they fix it, great, but if they don't, who are you going to call?
What are you going to do?
Right? And so it's a classic thing about, being on the bleeding edge, being an early adopter has massive risks, and, of course they had very, very good salespeople that, that sold this not fit for purpose thing. And, so it was difficult. It was difficult. It's still, I'm very glad to say that the same basic platform still exists and still used by Blackwells today. Obviously, it's been updated and lots of other bolts and things have been changed, but it hasn't gone under and it hasn't been wrapped up, sort of thing. So but it was a crazy. I mean, today we still deal with the pain of technology and software not working as it's supposed to be right out. So you can only imagine what it was like in '97.
I just can't imagine what it was like.
Bad.
So then you ended up moving to the Northeast in the early 2000s. Is that right?
Yeah. So I was at BT Cellnet was back then. It had just recently become O2, and I was about to take a job at Orange, which is now EE, and in London, and my best friend from BT Cellnet was from the Northeast, and I remember through the whole time we were working together, he would show me things like the refurbishing Baltic Mill and like the Millennium Bridge, and and was always super excited about it. And I have to admit, I didn't really pay much attention at the time, but he saw a job being advertised that I just thought, you should do this, right? And because his argument was that, like, well, you can move to Orange and that makes total sense, things like that, but it's just going to be the same large organization frustrations that you have here, except now your bosses are French, was his little joke. And so, yeah, I mean, long story short, it was a very long-winded process, but I obviously eventually met up with a recruiter, talked about this thing, and then he convinced me to come up for like a 2-day away day type of like group interview. There was like
Right.
maybe 10 or 8 other candidates going for this role, and so I didn't think I had a chance in hell. I was just like, I honestly thought I must be here maybe for some, because it's a public sector thing, right?
Yeah,
Some
just
sort of
make up the
diversity
numbers.
thing or something like that, right? You know, like to make the numbers up. So I totally relaxed through this process, and I just thought it was up in not Anacastle, but in Longhurst Hall.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Longhurst Hall near Morpeth.
Yeah.
And it was beautiful. So I was having a great time, and but I guess I enjoyed the process so much that I ended up getting a job offer to my shock and surprise, because there were some like ace candidates. There was the guy that was like head of research lab for NCR, and
Right.
another guy that was head of some technology group at the BBC. Another person that was like the head of the computer science department at Nottingham Trent or something like that. And I was just like, what?
But they clearly didn't enjoy it as much as you did, and maybe that's
I guess
what
not. Yeah, I think anyway. So for whatever reason, they offered me this role, and this is now One Northeast we're talking about, the old
Yeah.
regional development
Yeah.
agency, and then so I pitched up to Geordie Shores in October 2002, and yeah, an event then that began a 10-year period of my life, setting up this thing that eventually became called CodeWorks, and ran that for 10 years, with some success and enough to last for 10 years.
Well, I think a tenure of anything does suggest some level of success.
Yeah, no, it was good times for sure, and it was during this time that all this, like TEDx and Thinking Digital and all that sort of stuff really happened, and yeah, I mean, it certainly changed my life, and I feel like it's borne a positive ongoing legacy.
Yeah.
I mean, part of the reason so we ran CodeWorks for 10 years, and then basically what happened was that, of course, for most of the time it was underpinned by effectively UK and European public funds, right?
Yeah.
And then
and that was because there were 5.
There were 5
centers
centers
of
of excellence. That's right.
Including CPI, which is still doing
CPI
very
still going
well,
strong, and NARAC,
Yeah.
the New and Renewable
which
Energy
is still
Center,
going under a different
doing
name.
its thing
Yeah.
up there, and CELS, which was the Center of Excellence for Life
Life
Sciences,
yeah.
and CENAMPS, which is the
Oh, that's right,
nanotechnology.
And I think that's
Center
probably
of
the only
Excellence.
one that doesn't have a legacy as such.
It
Would you say, or-
it seemed to get folded relatively early on. I feel like it got absorbed by CPI primarily, whatever its projects were. CELS lasted a lot longer, but I don't know if it continues in
I
any.
think, well, I'm not sure it does exactly, but I think that we've still got a very strong the academic health and science
Sure. Oh yeah, for
network.
sure. Yeah.
which in some ways is a
Yeah.
descendant of CELS.
Legacy.
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. So yeah, and so mine was the digital technology and media one, and
So you were there. You basically set that up, or were there at the
yeah,
very
I
beginning?
was there at the very beginning. I was there before there was a CodeWorks. There was me.
Yeah.
It used to be called Digico.
Right. I'm glad it changed.
Digital Center of Excellence or something like that. So yeah. So that was one of the things that we first did, was found a different name.
Right.
And our thesis was, I mean, the reason I took the job was because, if you look at the earliest days of Silicon Valley and other places like that, it was usually primarily because a couple of bright people met at a networking thing. So that's, I think it was I forget the name of the one where Steve Jobs and Wozniak met, but it was a Silicon Valley area. It wasn't called Silicon Valley, of course, at the time.
Yeah. Was it a computer club, I think, wasn't it, or some kind of just gathering of like-minded nerds?
Of nerds, basically, yeah. And so we did a lot of work in that sort of space, or what we called clustering back then.
Oh yes, the good old clusters.
Clusters,
yes, I remember them.
clusters,
Yeah.
and
I mean, so when CodeWorks started, I mean, what was the state of the sort of digital economy in in the Northeast. Was there something there to work with, or was it?
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, it's like it was crazy to me because you had arguably the biggest success story in decades in the Northeast via Sage, right?
Of
I mean,
course,
it was,
yeah.
the only software company in the FTSE 100, and all these sorts of things, and it was always passed off as if it was some freak accident,
Some kind of
some
fluke.
weird thing that these nerdy billionaires or millionaires
That
were at the
shouldn't really
time.
have happened, because that sort of thing doesn't happen here.
Yeah, but the reality is obviously like ultimately, the core power centers, I mean, of that controlled the RDA, or at least influential the RDA, would come from chemicals and other kind of more hard science
Yeah.
types of things, and so they kind of dismissed. They would always kind of try to sort of minimize it as like video games and just just
Slightly
non-serious
frivolous things.
trivial
Yeah.
stuff that just we shouldn't be paying attention to, sort of thing, and so a lot of my argument, a lot of my battle in the early days was to say, no, this is for real,
Yeah.
and it not only can happen here, it has happened here. And we don't, it'd be crazy to think, oh, we're just going to create another Sage, but it is an indicator that there's no reason why by supporting it organically, you couldn't help that happen again, or other forms of it. Yeah, and it was in 2005 when all the people, the CEO, the chair, many of the board members, the most of the sort of director level people at One Northeast all got swapped out, right?
Right.
And as you know, when new management comes in, they want to
Everything
stamp
changes.
their presence
Yeah.
on the thing. And so we had a very dramatic meeting in February 2005, a board meeting for CodeWorks, and we're inducting a brand new chair, a guy named Andy Allen, may he rest in peace, who was the former chief executive of Tyne Tees Television, and went on to become Central and Granada, I think, CEO as well. Gave David Cameron his final job in the private sector before David became a full-time politician, head of policy and PR, something like that at Carleton, I think. And yeah, and somewhat unannounced, one of these new directors came in, and I'll leave them nameless for your podcast, and announced that One Northeast was going to be ending our funding, and that we would be going to be shut down.
Okay.
Yeah, which was a surprise to us, and then to my poor incoming chair. We had one advantage, which is that it turned out that Margaret Fay, who was the chair of One Northeast at the time, he had given her first big break into management in television, which obviously she went on to be very successful in the ITV world. And so, they didn't know anything, but they had a relationship. And I think, I mean, I don't know, I've never been given the full details, but conversations were had, and we earned what I call politely a stay of execution.
Okay.
Yeah. But we were put under no uncertain terms. I mean, obviously, you didn't have to be a genius to say, okay, well, we shouldn't. We have no idea how long the stay of execution is going to last, right?
Yeah.
One would suspect the first moment that this one particular director in particular had to kind of access, he would do so. So it was that point that really kind of made us, because we thought we were doing a wonderful job at that point. And we've been doing it for about 3 years, and we could point to all this evidence of success in terms of like helping win grants and all this. We were building up these digital networks that were going really well, but obviously we weren't breaking through, and the sort of like the dark force, the dark side of the force was kind of out to get us, and that's really what began this journey to try and figure out, well, what the hell can we do that both hits our public duty goals, but also has some potential to be sustainable financially without government support. Anyway, so I picked up an issue of The Guardian around that time, and I read about something called TED Global, right? And what it was the TED conference's first ever conference outside of America. It took place in Oxford, and a woman named Carol Cadwalader, who became very famous later on, wrote it up and just waxed lyrical about this thing, right? So I looked it up, I Googled it, and discovered the main conference was in California, in Monterey at the time, and cost something like $4,400 to get into this thing. And on top of that, add injury into insult, you had to apply to get into this thing, right? I'm like, what the
And
hell?
wouldn't necessarily be accepted.
Exactly, right? So I thought, but I mean, there's no way we could have, even if we had the money, there's no way we could have justified spending that kind of cash to send anyone, much less me, to think. But I discovered that Adobe at the time sponsored, I think, I don't know, say 5 to 10 passes for people in not-for-profits or charities, right? So I applied, and fortunately, I was able to get one of these golden tickets. It is a little bit like Willy Wonka, right? And anyway, so I went in 2006 and just had an extraordinary experience. I mean, on the surface, I mean, literally one of the first people I met there was Sergey Brin, the co-founder of Google, right?
Nice.
They were throwing up an opening party for what they called TED Virgins, people who would come into there for the first time. And, who else did I meet? Matt Groening I met online. We used to stay in line to go see the presentation that became Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth.
Oh yeah.
Right. And also stuff. And I could drop names left, right, and center, but that's not the point. I mean, literally, if I'd never met any of those people, the big thing was that so it's a 4-day conference or thereabouts, and typically starts at like 8:30 in the morning and goes to like 6:30 at night or something like that. And up to this point, for IBM and others, I'd been to tons of trade shows and exhibitions, and I generally speaking, I don't think I ever enjoyed a single one.
No.
Outside of
they're pretty dull, really, aren't they? Let's face it.
Yeah, especially the actual bit.
Yeah.
It's all the actions of the evening, right?
Yeah.
In the dinners and the parties and blah blah blah. And I sat for 4 days, transfixed on the edge of my seat, just listening to all this amazing content being beamed into my head, and coming back, after the dinner and after the drinks, at 11:30 at night with more energized than when I left in the morning. Much to the annoyance of my partner and our daughter at the time. We were like, passing out, and and it was a life-changing experience, as it has been for many people. And I came back to the North End and said, I know what we're going to do. We're going to try to create something like that. Now, unfortunately, at the time, there was no TEDx event. And if there was, then Thinking Digital might never have existed. We might have just had, the TEDx Newcastle event. But it didn't. So we didn't actually write in. But I'm sure they'd had at that point thousands of people saying, "Oh, could we do something like a TED locally?"
Yeah.
And I'm sure they always just brushed it away with a due sense of irritation. And so that's ultimately why we decided to launch Thinking Digital.
Right.
Was just like, well, we'll just.
So it was very much modelled on the TED conference, but
totally. We overtly, proudly, said totally inspired by that experience, and we're not going to have, we didn't think billionaires would start attending our conference, or Cameron Diaz or these sorts of people. So, but we just thought, before there was 10X, we thought, I'm positive that this kind of content, this kind of format can be appreciated by tons of people, not just, the co-founders of Google and
the chosen few who are selected to travel to Monterey.
Exactly, right. And that it took a while. But the problem, of course, is when we launched the conference in 2007, and 2008 was actually the first conference. There were no TED Talks. Yeah. There was no TEDx. So me telling people about this was just like, what on earth are you talking about? It's probably like when people first heard about Burning Man. You're like,
what do you compare it to?
What the hell? Why am I going to go out to this friggin' desert to like be with all these weirdos and artists? And anyway, so yeah, and the first year was nearly a disaster. I mean, it was because we were also we were charging upwards of like £700 to kind of attend this thing, right? And because part of the whole inspiration was that it was going to be like self-sustainable, right? Yeah. And also for me, well, you could go to the real TED at $4,400, or you could save all this money, right? Yeah. But if if you never knew about the other one, then you're
Yeah.
like, well, why?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
and at the time, you remember, I mean, the place was flooded with all this labor money, right? And so conferences charging were actually pretty rare.
Yeah.
You know, everything was free back
Yeah.
then.
And
you know?
people expected everything to be free, didn't
Yeah,
they?
it's just a total, and it was just like, what, you're charging? And you're charging more than £5? What the hell? So that, but I think it was more than the cost. It was just simply just the concept of, and you know, and so yeah. So the first one was just like how we got enough people into the room. I mean, I'd say we got just enough people to the event that it wasn't embarrassing. It was a
Well,
face-saving
I would call that
conference.
success for the first ever
Yeah,
of something like that.
Yeah.
I would say that counts as success.
yeah, and so yeah, and so because we escaped with us, and I will say is that the people who did go got the thing. They immediately were like, oh my God, this is amazing. You know, so which was so we had really good feedback, and we were also, I mean, and so we basically had no choice but to roll the dice again for 2009. 2009 was the beginnings of the financial crisis, and we had all these headwinds going into it, sort of thing. Like so Microsoft and I think Cisco were like two of our sponsors the previous year, and they were just like, we're pulling up the the anchors, and we're not gonna be able to sponsor. We're not gonna be able to send anybody. Good luck, and we'll hopefully see you on the other side of this thing. And but yeah, I mean, actually, what it was it, from what we could tell, it really was the beginnings of Twitter crossing the chasm from being a total nerd techie thing to the beginnings of it reaching out to a broader community. And back then, there was so little content on Twitter.
Yeah.
I mean, you got so few tweets, you could literally get a text message every single time you got a tweet coming in.
Yeah.
That's how little traffic there was on the thing, right? Yeah. And so our event was actually news, and you could see in our own traffic, like the relative virality of it for us, sort of thing. So anyways, 2009 was greatly improved. I think we were close to break even that year. By 2010, it was now, I mean, I think 2010 was the first year that I think we made it to the list of the Guardian's top 100 stories of the Media Guardian top 100. So the top 100 media stories of the year. And then the year after that, we made it to Wired Magazine's top 100 list, which I think we were on for 2 years. And yeah, so I mean, it was the ball was rolling the right way down the hill, so to speak, and it was it was good times. But in that time, the Labor government, obviously, I guess Brown loses to eventually the coalition government takes over, and as you know, the number one thing on their agenda was to kill the RDAs. Right.
Yeah, that was a strange time for a lot of people.
Oh, very, very strange time. And so I was just...
So you were still running CodeWorks at this point?
Yeah, so CodeWorks didn't shut down until 2012.
Right.
And I set up Thinking Digital Limited. And that was basically just based on, I had never had any particular dreams of being an entrepreneur or anything like that. It really was just an emotional sense that at least try to see if we could keep these things going in a non-funded way. Yeah. And just... I felt like I owed that much to the Northeast, who had done so much to support our work before. And so then, and we, and I mean, to finance it, I actually literally sold my house in Liverpool, which is another thing that people were just like, starting to beg your belief that this is actually happening. But yeah, I mean, because it was just, as you know, with conference economics, it's, you're never, I mean, 1 in a billion instead of 1 in a million tech startups go. 1 in a billion of things like what this is go anywhere. But yeah, again, it really was a case where they talk about how oftentimes the public sector can sometimes crowd out private sector support, and I think I guess is that in this particular case, when people realize, oh well, like if we want this thing to continue, we're going to have to find ways to, and so. Anyways, that was the beginning of that journey, and fortunately, here we are, I guess 11 years-ish later, and, still, I mean, obviously we had to go through COVID as well. Literally the worst part of the economy to be in, running large live in-person events, right?
Yeah, couldn't have been much worse. No.
Yeah, that's right. So that, I mean, there's obviously a lot of other detail in there, sort of thing, but those are sort of the major arcs.
Yeah. So that's brought us pretty much up to, well, not so much up to date, but up to the current kind of thing that many people know you for.
Yeah.
So should we stop for a break and then explore a bit more about this whole world of knowledge that you share
Sure.
with us?
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
Welcome back. We've got a nice cup of tea. Hopefully you've done the same. And like all of our guests, Herb, I asked you, what was your favourite biscuit? Sorry, I'm just going to take a slurp. And you actually give me a number of different options, so which is good. Give me plenty of choice. So I've gone for the good old American Oreo. So
Oh, thank you.
please do. One of many American imports to the. How long have we been able to have Oreos in the UK? It's not. I don't remember when I was a kid having Oreos. They were always things we saw on the telly and wondered what they tasted like. They're so sweet, though, aren't they? You can feel your teeth dissolving as you eat them, I think.
They are on the sweet side, yeah. I think they're sweeter here than they are in the US, if I'm honest with you.
Really?
Yeah.
I'd
I'm
be
not
surprised
sure
if
why.
anything was sweeter here than in the US, because yeah, they seem to use sugar or sugary substances in almost everything. So this is one of your go-to snacks, is it?
It's actually pretty rare I have this. So if I'm honest with you, I usually have it when I visit my mother, who keeps her own stock of it. Otherwise, I'm not ready. But since you were offering biscuits, I had to give you a list of, I think, at least 5 options.
You did indeed,
Yeah.
yes. And this is what I went for. So we were talking about. So you kind of brought us up to, not quite up to date, but in terms of the beginning of the, I suppose, the commercial life of Thinking Digital, as opposed to the time when it was part of a part of CodeWorks, and so that must have been the start of quite an adventure, actually making it work as a commercial entity and all of the things that go with that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we had done it previously under the support of the old CodeWorks company and the funding that it attracted. And I literally didn't know if there would be enough support from sponsors and obviously attendees to make it all work. But we found that it did. I mean, and I think there's this sort of thing about calling something either public sector or commercial, and ours is probably something in between. It's kind of more like you might call a community capitalism, perhaps, or some other in between thing where it doesn't exist. I mean, there are far easier ways to make money than do what I do. It's as they say, a labor of love. It's a passion project, not a profit project.
Yeah.
And but it's like a lot of things in that sort of space. It's very gratifying when it goes well. I feel like I've learned a lot and developed a lot as a person in the process. And it remains constantly challenging. There's frankly just never enough time or resource to kind of develop all the things you really want to develop. So yeah.
And I think there is definitely a community around the conference, isn't there?
Yeah.
So I mean, there must be some people who've been to most of them, if not all of them.
Yeah, we have a handful that have been to all of them, and then a slightly larger group that have been to all but one and that kind of thing. So yeah, and then most of the vast majority of the attendees now are past attendees of some form sort of thing. So yeah.
So and you pretty much sell out that hall 2 in the Sage, or what's the Glass House as it is now.
Yes,
every year, which is quite an achievement.
And the Northern Rock Foundation Hall as well. We get both.
So there's a live stream in there, isn't
there?
The
the live lounge, as we
live
call
lounge.
it.
Yeah,
that's right.
yeah.
Which gives the multitaskers a
So they
kind
can
of
take
different
the laptops.
space. Yeah, they can bring the laptop in. It's just more laid back, and you're and it's interesting about. But we take over both of those spaces. So yeah.
Yeah. Because the thing that amazes me, both with Thinking Digital and the TEDx's and the other things you do, you have such an amazing range of speakers, most of whom aren't kind of household names or doing normal things, shall we say. So where do you find these people? How obviously it's very carefully curated, but how do you decide what things will fit together well?
Yeah. So I mean, the bottom line is we find people through research. I mean, sometimes we by chance happen to be at an event or a conference where somebody speaks and they're really outstanding. Sometimes, occasionally, we'll get recommended by somebody from the community who says, "Oh, I saw this person. You really got to speak to them," and so on and so forth. And and that's not an insubstantial. I mean, for the TEDx Manchester event, I literally got a DM from a direct message from Andy Burnham. Say, I met this guy. He's amazing. He turned out to be an ex-military guy that had set up a barbershop, but then pursued charity work. We was doing free haircuts for the homeless, and gave a talk about his charitable work ultimately. So, and that's great to see. But the core of it still is basically doing our own research, and that's research into interesting topics, and then finding interesting people. Sometimes it's the other way around, where we read a story about a particular entrepreneur or an explorer or researcher or whatever, and think, wow, this person sounds really, really interesting. Let's get in touch. And that's really it. It's just a natural, our team's natural curiosity across a variety of topics that makes it happen. And that's why it happens, because to some extent, it's what we would be doing even if there wasn't a conference.
Yeah.
We would be reading 50 articles a day or whatever it is, from any different, point on the internet to some extent, right? And I guess what you could view as a liability, i.e., lack of focus, suddenly in this conference format becomes an asset in terms of curiosity across a wide variety of topics.
Yeah. So it seems that the key criteria is this going to be interesting? And it doesn't really matter why it's going to be interesting, as long as it's going to be interesting and people are going to go, yeah, that's interesting.
Well, I'd say that there's like, I mean, certainly the core of it is this interesting. Obviously for something like, for the Thinking Digital stuff, we need to have a certain critical mass of sort of tech, digital, science-related type content, I think. But once we deliver that, then we have more freedom to do slightly more left field types of speakers as well. So yeah. So yeah.
And then when did the TEDx's come about? Because I remember it was about 2010, 2011?
2009 were the first ones, and we produced amongst the first in the world. I mean, not that it really matters, but we were early on into the experiment, and
because as you said, if there'd been a TEDx, then there might not have been a
weirdly,
Digital.
had there been one 2 years earlier, then Thinking Digital might not have existed, and which would have been a shame, because they actually have developed into very distinct and different things. Partially because TED are quite, they don't want to make sure that their assets aren't being used to promote Thinking Digital, and so, which is fine with us. We've never, we approach this very pure at heart, not try to leverage TED's good name to further our own thing. And and the two have, and a lot of people thought, oh, like if there's a Thinking Digital, then isn't TEDx just going to cannibalize Thinking Digital? And actually, it turned out no. It's quite a broad church, and now we have, as we mentioned before, the Bright Ideas Gathering in Durham. Again, you think, well, isn't this like really just another kind of overlap? And as it turns out, no. There are very, I mean, there's still plenty of people today when I talk about, have you heard of TED Talks or things like that? And like, no, what is that? So there's lots of the world that hasn't, if you build and switched on to this sort of stuff. And I mean, and then there was the Dynamo conference came around for a while, and then people are like, oh, well, aren't they going to like, and so done properly, there's I mean, given obviously this the stuff you do, if you find an audience and you provide it with the right kind of nurturing and content that's specifically interesting to that area, then yeah, you can kind of go on and on, really.
Well, exactly. I mean, we found with the Rise and Design events that we hold and have held every month since 2009, which is just an
It's a
incredible.
long time.
I would never have imagined it, but I think we hit on a formula almost by chance that just seemed to work, and that people that it appeals to people, and it's never changed. In fact, some of the slides I was using 2 weeks ago are the same as the ones I used for the first one, because it it just works.
Yeah.
And
That's great.
it's really good when you hit on something like that, and when people respond to it. And I think with us, same as with yourself, we have a community of people for whom it is an important part of their calendar, and it's great when that happens, because you really feel like it's bigger than just an event in a room with speakers. It's something much
it's a
bigger.
community.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. No, that's great. So this third picture is you with probably one of, well, I think he is the most viewed TED speaker, the late great Sir Ken Robinson.
Yeah.
How many million views have some of his talks?
Countless.
Ridiculous.
A lot. Yeah.
So was that at was that at a TEDx, or it was an actual TED conference that you met?
So that photo was the only TEDx event that Sir Ken has done was our TEDx Liverpool,
really?
2014, and it was because he's from Liverpool, and
Of course,
you see the person on the right is his brother.
I was going to say it's
John.
almost like you've got two Ken Robinsons there. but
That's right.
he's
Yeah.
very-
So
very
John,
like
it's
each
his
other.
brother John, and yeah, he happened to be in Liverpool the same weekend we were doing TEDx Liverpool at the Everyman Theatre, which had just been reopened and refurbished.
Right.
And it was a kind of magical TEDx moment.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And he gave we did an interview, and then he offered to take over the hosting for the final session. I was like, oh my God, wow! And he was amazing, and you really just see this is a very bright, capable person. I mean, because obviously he didn't know who was speaking, but was able to pick up very quickly about doing the introductions, and then soon he was effectively doing a stand-up comedy in between speakers, and it was an amazing thing, and obviously he's now since passed, and so we all feel extremely fortunate to have. And another nice thing was, despite him, especially in the TED world, being a superstar, if anything, behind the scenes, he was more impressive, more conscientious, more friendly, and nice than the stage persona that you see.
Yeah.
So, which was great to see.
Yeah. So if anyone hasn't watched, I think he's got a couple of talks, but certainly one of his TED talks is the most watched TED talk ever, and with good reason. So he talks a lot about, as you were mentioning earlier, about creativity, and particularly for kids, that school isn't always the place where they're taught to be creative. In fact, it's often the reverse, which is, and it was a huge passion of his to try to change that. One of the favorite story that he tells is the one about, I think it was a teacher friend of his who was teaching an art lesson, and she noticed that there was a girl, I think they were kind of 9, 10-year-olds, and there was a girl at the back of the class who was usually quite disruptive, and she was concentrating really hard on what she was drawing. So the teacher kind of just very quietly kind of sort of crept behind her just to see what she was doing, why she was so concentrating so hard. And she said, "Oh, so Becky, what is it you're drawing?" She said, "Miss, I'm drawing a picture of God." And the teacher said, "Oh, but nobody knows what God looks like." She said, "They will in a minute," and carried on drawing. And I just think that's a fantastic illustration of everything that he says in his talks about supporting that fearlessness in kids rather than beating it out of them, which sadly is often the case.
Yeah, I think that's, we talked a little bit before earlier in the thing about what is the purpose of the United Kingdom, right? Why should it exist? And this it's not exclusive to the United Kingdom, it could be any country, but I increasingly think that the mission of this country should be, and I'm sure that plenty of people disagree with it, around trying to help identify every one of its citizens' strengths and passions,
Yeah.
and to help give them some direction about where they might want to consider to be headed and how they want to develop their life, so that, because I do genuinely think that, I think, a lot of mental health and other things like that is that, you've gone so far in life and you still don't even know what on earth it is you like. You're surviving.
Yeah.
You may be drawing a decent wage, and some people are, especially with the onset of AI and other technologies, right? And part of what computers are really good at is doing boring, repetitive tasks, oftentimes technically difficult, but still boring, repetitive, and just doing them far better than, more reliably than humans can, right? So what's kind of like the last refuge, of humans, is around finding things that they are really good at and also that they're really passionate about, right? And when you can have the two, overlap, that's a very special place to be.
Yeah.
And if you could imagine a country devoted to the mission of, from the moment that these people are developing, to help them identify, for, I guess, the uses of the state, but mostly for the person, what on earth is it that you might be good at? I'm not saying this is easier said than done. I realize that, but I actually think that is an exciting mission for a nation to exist. That is a real purpose and a differentiator, obviously. And then competition becomes around who is enabling their human capital better than others, right? And I would love to see, education and I think, the argument, again, going back to Scott Demetra, is in the old days, the teacher oftentimes literally did have a monopoly on the knowledge that was being spouted forth. Obviously, that's no longer the case today. They're obviously hopelessly outmatched by Google and other technologies, right? And so instead, this idea as a teacher, as a coach or facilitator, to kind of help, allow the discovery to happen with the students, and they are almost guardrails and kind of shepherds, if you will, not dictators.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting that a lot of the guests that we've had on this podcast, they've talked about their early life, and then they met someone, or they went somewhere, or they experienced something, and that was the key, almost, that opened up a door for them. And you kind of think, yeah, that's great, but what if you hadn't met that person?
Sure.
What would your life look like? And I think, and as you were talking about with the Bright Ideas Gathering, giving young people opportunities to just be exposed to all this amazing stuff could change lives, and I'm sure it does change lives. And it's quite a simple thing to do. It's not rocket science, is it? It's just giving people at any age exposure to things that might spark something in them, and then giving them the ability to follow that.
It's probably not true for everyone, but it's certainly true for many people, is a feeling that you are developing is I actually think is fundamental to happiness, right? And whatever that development could look like, it could be physical, it could be mental, it could be professional competence, whatever, but something that you are growing, and I genuinely think that is a really fun. And for me, I mean, as an example, I mean, as I think I mentioned before that, we were, when the pandemic hit, we were in probably one of the worst, if not the single worst part of the economy to be in. Holding
getting lots of people together in a big room,
in a small closed room, ideally without even windows, right? And so, and obviously there was people say, oh, do these virtual events and blah blah blah. But we weren't interested in that because we were, part of it is that we love the experience. And so, that was a long time to basically be. Now to be fair, we used the time to do a couple of things. We cleaned up our YouTube channel, which was great. But one of the things that actually shown to us, going back some of those old talks, I thought, which were some of the classics, and upon further review, I thought it's a good talk. It's not a bad talk, but it's not. It didn't deliver the sort of the against the memory that I had of it, sort of thing, right? And so, not surprisingly, in doing this for 15 years, we've learned a few things along the way, right? And so, yeah, and so, coming out, and so for me, coming out of the pandemic, and which you've spoken to many people, especially in this kind of like, effectively, sort of leisure, travel, entertainment sort of space, that, um, you know, having to effectively rebuild, it's kind of having pushed a boulder up a hill, and then suddenly it rolls halfway back down. You got to go back down
Yeah.
and it was pretty tough to get inspired to want to do that again. But I think for me, so one of the things that we changed was, upon reviewing the content, I thought, well, we're now, so I now coaching. I'm not a lot, but I mean, I coach, other TEDx events and their speakers, and I have a few private clients that do this for. And I thought, well, why aren't we doing this for our own events, right? And would say in general that probably, back in the old days, the pre-COVID days, probably roughly 75% would get just very high level, support, if you will, right? And 25% we would get more deeply involved in. And then we flipped that, and so now it's really 75% that we're deeply involved in the talks, and the great thing for me is that it's given me an area to develop. And so like this is and of course it's nice is that excuse me, the part of our agreement with TED is that for running these TEDx events is that we have to allow them to independently assess the success of the event with the attendees, and which they do through effectively an NPS or an audience survey. And we weren't too happy about it early on, but it actually started to be quite useful as feedback often is afterwards. But the events in the post-COVID era, have both been for TEDx Manchester, TEDx the highest scoring events we've ever done.
Really?
Yeah. So I mean, to some extent, it's a speaker event. So if you are actually spending more time making the speeches better.
Yeah, it should be obvious, really, shouldn't it?
It should be. Yeah, it's like, like I guess like a chef who suddenly decides, what if maybe we worked on these recipes that we've been relying on for 10 years, and so, but of course it's also very gratifying that the extra work we're putting in is making a quantifiable difference, and also that I mean it's like a treasure hunt, like going through these talks and trying to find the kind of sweet spot in it, and then helping the speaker develop that sweet spot, if you will. And sometimes it's something that's truly revelatory, and sometimes, I mean, we had a talk at TEDx Newcastle 10 days ago. You would have seen, obviously, a Geordie named Gianfranco Rosolia, who was born and educated here, and he's an RGS grad and went off to Cambridge and other such places, and then has spent 12 years at Apple, right?
And I think everyone was thinking, oh, we're going to hear some good stuff about Apple.
Right.
But we didn't, but it was an amazing story that he told.
Yeah, well, he talked about his grandmother. And it was literally...
Although we didn't know that till the end, did we, that it was his grandmother?
Well, it was his
Sorry if anyone hasn't seen it and you're going to watch it. I've just given away a bit of a spoiler, but hey.
Literally, a dying wish of hers was for him to document her story, and to write a book, which he did, and was published last year. And off the back of that, we came in contact, and in the initial address, he tells it a fairly straight tone, which is like, this is my grandmother, her dying wish, and it was all really interesting stuff. But then we just thought it's lacking some sort of drama or surprise or something, right?
Yeah.
It was literally a history lesson, right? Which is fine, and it was interesting, and she did some really impressive stuff. But so then we worked with him and realized to pull the reveal to the very end. It was a kind of it was just a kind of borderline shocking moment, not just surprising, but shocking, like
And it just elevated the whole story to a different level.
I remember looking out from backstage and into the audience, and then people like kind of almost visibly shocked, and then some people you could see them. It was for some it was an emotional moment, and. So that there's stuff like that, and with were you at TEDx Newcastle 2022 with Catherine Mannix,
I think I
the
was, yeah.
palliative care
Yeah, yeah,
doctor?
yeah,
So that was arguably the most popular talk of that year,
yeah.
right? And that was another one where, um, she did an initial draft that I would say was quite uh, rational. It was a fairly
Right.
straightforward discussion about death and why we should not fear it and
Mm.
embrace it, and has all these positive things by embracing it. So just it was fine, but it was
Yeah.
Then she did so we gave her some feedback, and she said, so she gave us a second draft. We will sometimes have them do it onto like Zoom or something like that, and so it's
Okay.
pre-recorded. And then we're gonna have a Zoom to talk about this draft. And then I got on the Zoom with her, and she said, "Oh," she says, "Have you watched the second draft?" I said, "Yes, yeah, of course, yeah, I have." She said, "Well, ignore that because I have a brand new idea." I said, "Okay, all right." And what she wanted to do was Queen Elizabeth had just passed away,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
And she thought, what a brilliant example of a public death that actually was a celebration of life. That it wasn't something that was hidden away. It was obviously literally broadcast into the homes of millions of people around, billions around the world. And all the and what I said to her is that listening, I said that makes sense. It's certainly a rational thing to do, and it's a talk. But the problem is that you don't have any relationship with her, and if you did, they would never let you talk about her, right? And she's like, "Oh, okay, well, I don't know. I still think it's really good." So let me just. I watched your thing. I've been doing this for 15 years. I've seen in person some of the greatest TED Talks ever. Sir Ken Robinson, Tony Robbins, Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor. So. And of course, we've also been preparing, my own talks and, for this 15-year period. And I'll tell you this, until today, I have never cried listening to someone speak. And your talk, I'm sitting here all alone in my office, and I just absolutely bust out crying because it was such. I mean, it was two things. One, I mean, she tells the story of her going on rounds with a senior doctor. She thinks she's going to be an oncologist, a cancer researcher is in her direction, and she listens to him talk to a dying French lady, who wants to know what's going to happen to me as actually she knows she's dying, but what's and he just talks her through it. And I think for me, I mean, my brother and my father had relatively recently passed away and things like that, so there was a bit of that. But I think more it was just I had literally never heard of anyone talk about what happens. Like in general. I mean, obviously, sometimes people do have dramatic deaths and the car crashes and horrible things like that. But obviously, 99.9% of us fade away more or
Just
less, right?
in quite a mundane
Yes.
way.
Yes, exactly, right.
Yeah.
And what should we expect? What should our families expect, and so on and so forth. And it was just that and I think TED at its best off, or the talks that we do at their best do combine both like genuine knowledge, but oftentimes delivered in a novel way or with some sort of emotive story as part of how it's talked about, and that was one of them. And so that was like that was, and it was interesting because I didn't know because it was like with the reaction I just had here alone in my office. It translates to 1,000 people
Yeah, and I'm
watching
sure it did.
and it
Yeah.
did. It absolutely did. And I remember she was signing copies of a book, and we've never seen a line so long for people who are desperate to meet her and to get a copy of her book, sort of thing. And if I can I continue this line?
Please do.
So this year we had another person who approached us to talk about mental health and music. So you remember Mark Deeks, the pianist.
Yeah.
And again, like his talk, the initial ones did actually very literally spend a lot of time talking about the links between mental health and music, and it was kind of interesting. It was definitely interesting. But he's not a professor of like psychology and music, right? He is a genuine professional musician. He's a professional teacher, so he's not a casual observer of this sort of stuff. But then we got to hearing about his own journey of how music helped to save him, right? And as you'll remember, he talked about he talked about how music is so often associated with some of the happiest, most memorable points in your life, I'm sure there's certain things in music that bring you back. I remember seeing a talk about the Beatles, and some person in the audience, I think Paul McCartney had played somewhere, and a clip of him after hearing one of the old Beatles songs being played by Paul McCartney, and he's like, I don't know, 72. He looks gruff. He looks like he's a kind of former East End gangster or something like that, and he absolutely just melts and busts, and it's beautiful to see actually. And he talked about how this song Starship, Nothing's Gonna Stop Us Now,
yeah.
which is a kind of a modern classic, right? And that was like their wedding tune,
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
And it was like so all this, and then unfortunately we learned that his baby daughter passed away, and under horrible circumstances that they have to ultimately make the decision to terminate, for lack of a better word, and all this is happening while that same song is playing. So this once joyous memory is now intermingled with literally the worst memories of life, sort of thing. And then talking about, obviously deep depression and finding a way out by basically creating music. You will build. So there was a totally unbeknownst, and then I guess a star had been purchased
That's
in
right.
honor of his
With her name.
past daughter.
Yeah.
With her, and he finds a way to use the coordinates and integrate that into a heavy metal music song, and he's got it tattooed on his arm, and it's just incredibly beautiful. And so with Catherine, I cried before we got on the thing. That one there, I just literally, I mean, I have a daughter as well, and so whenever you start getting into stories about that sort of stuff, I'm already getting, but we have to stop. We get back on in 10 minutes out of it, and then he's on again, and I'm just like, I can't.
I really enjoyed his talk because I've actually heard, I really like his music and some of the stuff he does, and I'd heard that piece of music, and without knowing it because it is quite an unusual sort of chord progression and things. I thought, oh, that's interesting. That's and I did quite like it. But then knowing where it had come from was just incredible. It was
no, it was and such a really ingenious way, because he said some people were saying, oh, you should write a song about her, or no, that's so naff. It's like that's what everyone does, right? But he found a way to do it really creatively, so that it just it was an amazing story.
And was that in his first draft of his talk, or was that something you helped him to
so that's
out?
So that was another one, hunting for the thing that's going to resonate with the audience. So mentioned in John Franco's case about bringing the reveal to the end, Catherine Mannix actually returning her to an early version of her presentation, that and in this one here was more just like, instead of telling us about how mental health music could help your mental health, and here's all this scientific research to cite, which is fine and it's interesting, and it was actually the first half of the presentation, right? How has it helped you, right? And then it's like, well, I had this situation, and it's like, oh my God, really?
Well, it's the difference between a conference and kind of an experience, or hearing someone's story. It's not just about exchanging facts, it's about exchanging experiences, isn't it? Stories, which is much more powerful, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's in order. I mean, one of the great speaker coaches is a woman named Nancy Duarte, who has spoken at Thinking Digital and at TED, and what she talks about is part of your job as a communicator is to move the audience, right? A lot of people tend to think about themselves as a speaker trying to do something, and actually your job is to help the audience, right? And you move people, as the name would suggest, first by emotions, right? And you have to, if you're gifted with humor, that's oftentimes a great way to kind of effectively warm up the crowd, build a rapport, build trust, and so on and so forth, if you will, right? But it doesn't have to be there. Obviously, not. Sir Ken was gifted with an incredible dry sense of humor, but very few people have that gift, right? Everyone has a story, and everyone can tell a story, right? And that is a remarkably effective way to build, so that the audience. I mean, I like to say that, the audience needs to buy into you first before going to buy into your message,
Yeah.
right? And then figuring it out, that's easier said than done, right? The buying in, but that's part of what you need to do to figure out like how are you going to move people, because people need to be disarmed or some way opened up, to considering your idea, in some way. So
Yeah, brilliant.
yeah.
Now, I can't imagine there's anybody watching this who doesn't know TED, but just in case, TED.com is where all the TED Talks are. And the TEDx's, so your TEDx's, are they on that website also?
Yeah. But they're both on the YouTube. There's a TEDx YouTube channel where they're all been. We have had something like 6 or 7 of our TEDx talks have been actually elevated to the main homepage of TED.com, which is for us is like winning a BAFTA or an Oscar or something like that.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And obviously a great benefit to the speakers who now suddenly have this global audience
TED
that didn't
alumni,
know that sort of thing. Yeah. And we've had a couple of speakers invited to the main actual TED conference in Vancouver, and stuff like that. But yeah.
Well, we'll make sure that the information on those, for those who aren't aware, is available somewhere when this goes out, because as it says, there are ideas worth spreading, and they need to be shared, and there are some amazing things on there, aren't there?
Yeah, and even just learning how to speak more effectively.
Yeah.
Even if you actually don't really care that much about experimental physics or whatever exotic topic, you will almost certainly be able to pick up something from every, especially if they've made it to the TED.com site, about the art of communication and about presentation. And I personally think, I mean, I've seen it for myself, how applying these sorts of storytelling techniques. I mean, so another thing, literally what I did was I had to go speak at, it was a conference of people that were primarily from the arts, so not from my world. And I thought, oh gosh, I really need to raise my game here. So I literally Googled 3-part story structure. I read up as much as I could with, in an hour, things like that, and then applied it. And it was magical about how the level of engagement in what I had to say was just so much higher by applying that to my talk. And like a lot of creative things, I spent years kind of honing that, if you will, to make it better and better.
Yeah. So what's next for Thinking Digital? More and more and more of it, or because it has pretty much stayed fairly constant in terms of the format and things. So is that just going to carry on, do you think?
Well, I mean, obviously the last 2 years have really been about recovering from the pandemic, if I'm completely honest with you, and luckily, now we're at a stage where it feels like we're 95% of the way back from where we were in, say, 2019 to today. So if I'm honest, we still feel like, there's still plenty of room for development to take it from where it was to the next level.
Right.
And that probably will play out for at least I don't know, the 2 to 3 more Thinking Digitals before we kind of feel like wow, we've got this, because part of it is I mean, it's one thing to say, oh, we're going to work a lot more on each of these speakers' talks, but as you know, once you start to dive into content, that's an endless thing, right? Yeah. I mean, you can take the top 100 all-time best movies or novels and find ways to improve them even now, right? So I'm obviously with the talk, I mean, we could spend a year, maybe not all of them, but a ton more time on them. So that's clearly, I mean, if I was the son of Bill Gates and I could just hire an endless army of speech writers and speaker coaches, then great. So part of our game is, how do you make it more sustainable, so that it doesn't require Herculean efforts from the team in terms of, I mean, on John Franco's talk, it literally pulled an all-nighter, just ideas and edits and all that sort of stuff. And that, you can't do that obviously with every single, talk. So that's
because for us in the audience, it looks so easy. You think, oh yeah, he's just got up there and told this great story, but we have no idea of what goes on behind the scenes to get to that point.
Yeah, I mean, events in general, people oftentimes don't realize how much goes into it to just make them happen at all, much less be at a high level sort of thing. And so, and a lot of it is, sort of, done behind the scenes. But yeah, that's right now. That's for us. It's we feel like we're onto something really exciting in terms of being able to take these talks reliably to the next level, whatever that means.
Yeah.
And it's just really now seeing, how far, we can kind of push that. So yeah, that's kind of our emphasis right now is in that just chasing of perfection to some extent. Yeah.
Yeah. So if anyone who's been to a TEDx or a Thinking Digital will be on the mailing list, will know exactly when they're coming up. If you haven't been to one, so Thinking Digital tends to be around May time.
Mid-May, yeah. I think
in
this
what's
year's
now the Glass House.
15th and 16th of May.
Okay. And TEDx, so there's TEDx Newcastle, Manchester.
Yeah, so the two ones that we know of for sure, so there'll be TEDx Manchester's the next one, Sunday the 3rd of March at the Bridgewater Hall in central Manchester.
Okay.
And then there's Thinking Digital in mid-May, as I mentioned. The Bright Ideas Gathering will be, I believe, the 2nd of November, Saturday the 2nd of November.
That's 24.
Yeah, and then we have a tentative date for the next TEDx Newcastle will be the 30th of November.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And if you're watching this in 2025, which you might well be, just keep an eye out. Just Google for
Thinking Digital or TEDx Newcastle.
You'll find it,
TEDx
and
Manchester.
you'll have an amazing, possibly mind-boggling couple of hours.
I hope so.
Yeah, I think that's true. Herb, it's been great. Thank you so much for joining us and telling us what goes on behind the scenes, what's brought you to this, to this place. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Cheers.
Well, thanks for joining us. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Do join us again for another edition of Northern Spotlights.